Hi everyone, we're going to begin this workshop on energy. Nice to see all of you here. And just one announcement before, because in European Parliament and for my group in particular, that's very important, the gender mainstreaming. And I'm very sorry just to have a male panel, so I have to apologize about that, because we tried to invite some women to this workshop, and we had a woman from the European Commission, but she had to cancel at last minute because I think she is in the Energy Council today out of Brussels. But my apologies, because we have to know that for us that's a key issue to gender mainstreaming the energy transition. But maybe that will be a question that we'll have afterwards on that. And on the other side, just to remember you that you have internet. I think you remember that you can connect to, I don't know if you have the paper here. No, that's not here, the paper. But you have internet normally. So you can use the our Wi-Fi, and at the same time you can use the hashtag postgrowth2018 that we use for dealing with this conference. So let's go straight to the point. We started a bit late because I think all the people were having a good lunch in the canteen. But now let's go straight to the point, to the energy. So squaring the energy cycle, that's the title of our workshop now. And let's be very clear about that. We're going to take the issue, or tackle the issue of climate change and peak oil, because I think that's the two things that we want to tackle right now. Because we have two challenges at the same time, so we want to tackle. We have two challenges that are two faces of the same coin. On one way, climate change, and the other way, peak oil. I think that you all know climate change, yeah, because we are in a very key year this year, because we will go to Katowice for the COP24 to see if we can go on and go further on with the Paris Agreement, which was signed 3 years ago. Maybe our speaker will say something about the ambition that we have here in the European Union with the Paris Agreement and in general with the energy policies. But you have to know that we are reforming, recasting the different directives around the energy policy of the European Union. So maybe that's a good moment to give some clue and some ideas to the European Parliament and European Commission. At the same time, we have the peak oil. Maybe that's an issue that you know very well in this room, but that's something that we don't hardly speak in the European Parliament or European Commission, to be honest. As MEP, I can tell you that. Sorry, I didn't present myself. I'm Florent Marcellesi. I'm MEP from the Greens from Spain. And that's something that we try to put forward in the European Parliament, but I think that's a strange world or strange concept that doesn't reach my interlocutors that I can have European Parliament and European Commission. But just let's remember that, or let's record that the peak oil is the point in time when the maximum rate of extraction of oil is reached, after which it is expected to enter terminal decline. This morning, Tim Jackson talked about that too, and I think that we already reached the peak oil right now. Maybe it would be interesting to know your position about that and how you introduce this concept in your model or in your policies. And let's be very clear too, because we know that energy is the base of everything that we do, how we transport, how we dress, how we eat, and most of all in a situation where the globalization is based on energy, most of all fossil fuels. So the question that we will have to ask is that possible to go on, further on, with this model just with renewables? That's one question that I would ask you. Is it, and how do you think that growth and energy are linked? Because this morning, for example, I was asking Vestager, the Commissioner Vestager, and I asked her about if it was possible or not to decouple energy use and economic growth. And she told me, yes, of course. We did it in Denmark. So that's my question that I want to ask to my panelists that I have here. Really, do you think that we decoupled energy use and economic growth in Denmark or in general in the European Union? Or for the Commission, do you think that's possible to decouple energy use and economic growth? Because that's a thing, I think that was of the key point in the debate that we have right now. Because I think that we see, or clearly see, that we have a clearly linked, a link very strongly between growth and energy. And we saw that, for example, in the crisis in 2008, 10 years ago, because growth began to decline when energy use began to decline. So I would like you two to talk about that. how you think that energy and growth are linked in that case. So that will be the most important questions that I want to make to you. And as we told this morning, I think that's very important to see the practical things too, to see how, in practice, we can do the transition. Because if we say that something is not sustainable and we have to go to another more sustainable world, we have to think about transition. A transition that has to be sustainable, a transition that has to be fair. So how do you want to do that? Or, for example, in your model, in your way to see that from the University or from the European Commission, how do you plan to make this transition to a world that we define as not sustainable? I think we agree on that because the European Union as such, that's like 3 planets, if I remember well, as a ecological footprint. So I think what we can say that's not a sustainable world that we are building like that. So how we can do to go from these 3 planets to 1 planet for the European Union, and doing that on a fair way, on a sustainable way, and democratic way. I know that's a big question, but I would like to have some alternatives, some things, because at the end of this workshop we will take all the ideas and we make some conclusions. So feel free to do that and to give us some good tricks. And to do this presentation, we will begin by our friend from Barcelona. I know you're Italian, but you live in Barcelona. And you are a member of ICREA. ICREA, that's the Instituto Catalán de Investigación de Estudio Ambiental. That means in English something like, how do you say that in English?
Catalan Institute of Research and Advanced Studies.
Yeah, perfect. And you are a member of UAB, that's the University of Barcelona. One of Autònoma, because there is different in Barcelona. And you will be the first one to take the floor. And I will be very strict with the time because I will ask each speaker to make 15 minutes, please, 15 minutes. And then you will have 5 minutes to answer each other, or to ask questions to each other. And then we will go to the room to ask some questions. We are going well because we have 2 hours. We have until 3.5, so I think we're going very well for that. So 15 minutes each, then 5 minutes to answer each other, and then questions from the audience, and we will answer or have a debate. Maybe that's not answer, just a debate to see where we are. So Mario, the floor is yours, 15 minutes, and good luck.
So thank you very much. I prepared something a little bit strange in the sense that I'm not answering exactly the question. As a matter of fact, we can go into the question later on. In these 15 minutes, I would like to make another point, is that I was given this question, we will be able to satisfy our energy needs. And what I would like to make clear, at least with my presentation, is that we do not have enough information, a good understanding of the situation in order to be capable of answering this question. We can say that we have a lot of trouble, but what is really important, at least worrisome for me, is that at the moment all the discussion done about how to tackle the sustainability, especially in the energy system, are based on urban legend or wishful thinking. There is very little reliable knowledge claims. And this is due to the fact, I think it is a systemic issue, that we want to use reductionist science, the science done by Newton, to deal with complex systems. A complex system, by definition, is something that cannot be measured with numbers in just one way. Every time you are measuring something, you are missing something else. So unless we are capable of expanding a little bit more the way we are handling the analysis of energy problems, so we are really not sure that what we call evidence-based is so based. So if you can go through the content of the presentation. I will use 3 examples, what went wrong with the Energiewende, then what if batteries are not included in the EU energy package, and what happened with the biofuel, that if they do not have bread, let him the cake. This was something written in a book in 1870, that is about the idea of using biofuel when we run out of oil. And also the idea of circular economy, that is, to me, is another fascinating example. And then to get very quickly to conclusions. So we can go past, get next. So, I mean, it is pretty clear that the Energiewende didn't work pretty well. They spent 200 billions. Now, more or less, they are emitting the same amount of CO2 they were emitting at the beginning. The cost of electricity 3 times higher than the United States. And then to a point that the German parties now agreed on stop to drop the 2020 climate goal, because they said there's no way that we can do it. Next. So I will use, rather than model some number, try a storytelling to say what's wrong with the Energiewende. What is wrong is the energy is a form of energy, electricity is a form of energy different from regular energy, is a mechanical energy, it's moving in pipes, basically. It's like water. So if you have a grid, you have something, a base load producing 400 units of water, and user having 400, using 400 units of water. So the user use more water, next. You have to put additional water into the pipes, otherwise the system stops working. So next. You have what is called peakers. You have turbines of hydro that put additional water. If the user stop using water, next, then you have to take out the peaker. Okay, this is the way it works a grid. So what happens if we put intermittent in it? Next, you put surprise supply. At a certain point, you start putting water into the pipes, and what happens if you are not regulating the pipes? Next, break down. So if you start putting intermittent in a grid, you are generating a lot of trouble. Okay, next. So what is the results here? That if you are using a base loader, let's say a nuclear plant or coal plant, this is using almost all the time, and all the electricity that is produced is used. A peaker, the same. If you produce, you use the peaker when it's needed, so assume all the electricity produced is used. If you're using an intermittent, first of all, you use the intermittent very little when there is wind, and especially solar PV in Germany is a very bad idea. You use 10% probably. But what happens is that not only you're producing much less energy per unit of capital, but also that when you're producing energy, maybe it's not used, because they are producing when not necessarily when it's needed, and they are not producing when it's needed. So it depends on how much is the fraction of the intermittent in the grid. The amount of energy actually used go down very quickly. So next would be probably 20% of 10%. So if this is true, what has been missed in all the discussion, next, so let's go quick, is that why should be relevant that a kilowatt hour of electricity intermittent is cheaper, but if cannot be used or when it's needed is not given. It is not necessarily true that if this is cheaper, it's better to have it. Or the same is not particularly relevant to have. We have 3 times more power capacity, 4 times power capacity of alternatives, because it doesn't translate in electricity you can use. Next. So, Gian, if we don't have a way of having a storage per se, the idea of start investing billions, hundreds of billions is not particularly good. Okay, next, we go to the, this is more or less the electricity demand on the top, then you have base loader covering the bottom part, then you have peaker next, and then you get next into alternatives, next. Okay, then you put more intermittent, next, put more intermittent, next. You can put as much as you want, but still it doesn't match your demand of electricity. So, this is a simple discussion that probably has been missed in all the debate before starting pouring money into the system. Next things. Okay, let's imagine batteries. So now we can have storage. Storage can you do with hydropower, but you need mountains. If you have a lot of Europe flat, it's a difficult issue. So in terms of batteries, how is the scaling issue? The next one. If Tokyo will remain one day without intermittent because there is too much wind and no sun because of a typhoon, it will require 600 gigawatt hour. Giga is 10 to 9. And then if the largest battery station next, that they are expecting in 2021, it will be 400 megawatt, 10 to the 6. So next, we are talking about that we will need 1,500 stations, the largest in the world, just to have backup for Tokyo for one day. Next, so if you are looking at the batteries of the car, and then still, for 2 million of cars, we already are in the order of 160 gigawatt hour. Next, if you put the cars in Europe, this will be an outrageous number, let alone the batteries required for backing up the grid. So next, we can go quick. This is called storytelling. So this is an example of the batteries that we have now, and again, next one. And these are batteries, more or less the batteries that you are using in your laptop. What is the problem? Maybe you had to renew it every 3 or 4 years or 5 years. Can you imagine these type of things, hundreds of thousands of things to be renewed every 3 or 4 years, how much it will cost? Do we have lithium? What are the environmental impact of recycling all these things? Nobody knows. I'm not saying it is not possible or that we should not do it. What I'm saying is that this is something that will not happen in the next 10 years, because if you are listening to things, everything in 2040, 30, everything is solved. Okay, next. Okay, let's go. This is my favorite biofuel. Okay, fossil energy was about using oil to save labor and land. Biofuel is about using labor and land to save fossil energy. That is, I mean, we miss what happened on this planet in the last 200 years, basically. You go next, a story to show this is very easy. Before, energy was done by biomass in rural areas to feed the cities. And next, for this reason, we didn't have urban population. Now, next, we have fossil energy going to the city, and from the city going to the countryside. And this is why we have more than 50-60% of urban population. So, why is this? Next. It is very easy. You can see the density. On the right, you see the density of supply. Please note that this is a logarithmic scale, so it's 10 times more at each thing. We can feed cities and other industrial use because the density at which we are producing energy with fossil energy is order of magnitude higher. If we were using biomass, it's much lower. If you're using biofuel, it's even lower because you have to spend energy to convert biomass in liquid fuel. Okay, so, okay, next. And then let's go, this is my favorite one, the bioeconomy part. You know, the term bioeconomy was introduced by Georgescu Roegen to say that if we would do things in the economy according to the space and density of natural process, we should go much lower. As a matter of fact, this is the origin of the growth. He was explaining the growth with the term bioeconomy. Just for those that are younger, do not know the story. Next one. So what happened is that if you are respecting the flows, the circulation of the flow in the ecosystem, then you are in a situation what's called external input agriculture. You can take out something out of that. And I would say 1 ton of hectare only if you are in a very good areas, and probably 10 kilos per hour of labor if you are in a very good farming system. Next. If you go in the way we are producing food now, it's a total linearization. Basically, you destroy all forms of life there, then you call Monsanto, you put seed, you put energy, and then you are totally linearizing all the flows. Flows of water, flows of nutrients, flows of everything. And whatever goes in, goes to humans. Nothing remains in the environment. So, our way of producing food and energy is a total linearization of flows. Okay, next. If you are looking, this is extremely self-explanatory. Human population on this planet was the same for hundreds of thousands of years, and the standard of living more or less. Suddenly, we start doubling the population every 30, 40 years, and in spite of having less resources, we are consuming more. Why is that? Because we are moved from a circular economy to a linear economy. That is something called also as industrial revolution. But again, this is something missed by the main narrative that we are using at the moment, because the idea is that if you go circular, you become richer. That it doesn't look like looking at this graph. Next. So, conclusion. There are 3 attractors. One is called socially construct ignorance, that all the people agree on official storytelling because it's the best thing to do, is keep coherence in the social fabric, everyone is happy with it. And this is what is called the economics of technological promises. We are in a situation, we have a problem of sustainability, yes, but we can solve it. More technology, more innovation, we'll do it. In my view, but this is a personal view, of course, this is an implausible narrative, and then is an irresponsible narrative, because in my view this is not possible, and will generate ungovernable things. I mean, you get Trump, then you can discuss why you get Trump, but I mean, if you keep telling things that people feel they are not true, you are losing legitimacy. Next. The next concept is Ancien Regime syndrome, that you have a society that starts refusing to process internal or external signal of danger. So citizens want to protect their fabulous standard of living. Government want to protect their majority at the next election. Banks and powerful industrial complexes want to preserve their control on the economy. As scientists, this is the most important part to me, want to preserve their position and research fund. So I'm in my personal ear, I'm not attacking the European Commission, I'm attacking the scientists, because to me, the official establishment, the scientific, academic, they should work on this, are not doing their job. And my last slide is, and this is something that I would, this is the suggestion that I would give to the Commission, that avoid the evidence-based policy is based on policy-based evidence. That when I was young, when I was doing research project, they would say, we have a problem, do you have an idea how to deal it? Then we had a move in the 90s, we have a problem, can you solve our problem? Now in 2000 and 2010 is, we are right, can you prove that we are right? I believe that the call should be about having a critical appraisal of proposed narratives, rather than ask scientists to confirm ideological things, not that yes we can. I believe it would be important that scientific establishment came out with a narrative about Houston, we have a problem. That would be much easier for everybody, the government, the things, and the other two work together, talk together how to find solution, rather than start saying we have the solution, is more technical innovation, because technical innovation will never solve any problem. The problem is political and social, and have to be solved there. Giving the responsibility of the solution to technology, in my view, is a way of giving money to banks and lobbies for sure, but not to solve the problem. I'm sorry.
Grazie mille, Mario. I think you made your point clear. The first message to the European Commission on the evidence-based policy, but we will come back to that afterwards, because before we give the floor to Grégoire Wallenborn, if I'm right, and you are a professor at the Université Libre de Bruxelles, and I won't read all your CV because that's a bit long, so I just will say that you are very interested in issues that cross energy, environment, technology, and daily life. And so I guess that you can answer the question that we asked at the beginning, how we can do to fill our needs in the energy system. Okay, first. 15 minutes.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure I will answer that so directly, but okay. Let's try. Yeah. We are scientists, you know. We like also to ask questions. Well, next, please. So I will begin with a quite radical quote. If we don't do the impossible, we shall be faced with the unthinkable, because I think Mario has just shown that we face a real predicament, not just a temporary crisis. Next. I will go quite quickly in the first part of my speech, because I will just show you the landscape in which I evolve, and I will try to slow down when I will try to give you some more original parts. First of all, I think we have to acknowledge that there has never been an energy transition. All energy sources have added up to each other, and even if we seem to begin to see some kind of declining, we are not sure, and I am going to show you that it won't go fast enough. Next, please. So that's a first answer to your question. Yes, there is a strong correlation between energy and GDP. So it's not the price of energy, which is important. It's really the volume of energy, because we need, as you said, energy for all our activities, production, consumption of producing goods, all the goods which are around us were done with a lot of energy. And that's obviously a big problem, because if we want to reduce energy consumption, and we have to do, that means that at least in our economical system, we will have to reduce also economic growth. That's quite clear. Next, please. Okay, that's just to show you where we are now. I've shown you just the two sectors for which energy consumption increased the most, internet and air traffic. We are now at 13 terawatt for the machines, so it's why we call that the Anthropocene, because the humans and their machines have raised at the level of geothermal flow, which is 40 terawatts. So it means that we are increasingly using fossil fuels to make obviously our machines work, but at a very high power level. Next, please. So that's another thing that probably everybody knows in the room. It's the great acceleration. So this growth of everything, or almost, has accelerated after the war, and it is linked obviously to accumulation of stuff. Next, please. That's another way to see the great acceleration. So next, please. The consequences are very well known. It's CO2 emissions, which raises a lot. And I've put in the right corner the carbon leakage, because you can have the impression that OECD countries have seen their emission levels stabilize. But if you include emissions that were produced to make the products we use, it would raise anyway. And so that's important to include also this emission. It's not because we delocalize industrial activities that we should be happy with our emission, at least in the European territory. Next, please. So that's the situation we face now. If you compute in terms of carbon budget, it means that if you wait too long to peak carbon emission, the decline will have to be very, very steep. And we are already in this curve. It means that to preserve the climate and the raising of temperature below 1.5 degrees, we will have to act very quickly and very, very hard, and probably we won't be able to do that. Next, please. That's the different scenarios made by the IPCC. You can see that some scenarios which are quite climate compatible, below 2 degrees, requires that we remove CO2 from the atmosphere after 2050. And we don't know how to remove CO2 from the atmosphere unless we plant a lot of trees and we don't cut them, or maybe a solution will be geoengineering. And I'm talking very seriously. I think in the next year we will see this theme of geoengineering popping up, because it will be the only reasonable solution that we face. And we know that geoengineering is very dangerous. I won't speak too much about that now. We can discuss that later. Next, please. So Mario has shown that we will have a big problems with renewables. Here, just to show you that at the moment, in 2017, the renewable power capacity was just 2 terawatts. And you have, obviously, to incorporate the load factors to understand that it's not really 2 terawatt in permanent. So you have to reduce that figures. And so the gap is more than 10 terawatt today. If we want, obviously, to continue at the 13 terawatt level at the global level. Yes, next please. If you see where renewable are used, you can see that we will have a big problem, at least in next year, if we want to at least to use only renewable, mainly with transport, but also with power, and a bit less with heat. And so the transport is really the big problem with renewable energy also. Next, please. So that's another way of answering to your question. Do we observe absolute decoupling? It's important to speak about absolute decoupling and not relative decoupling, which means that the CO2 emissions can be reduced and the energy consumption can effectively be reduced while you can say economic growth can continue. We see this kind of trend at the moment in Europe, that's at the European level, but it is quite clear that this curve is not steep and not in line to what is required for climate reasons. Next, please. So, energy efficiency is considered often as the solution for our energy problem. And I think this is really misleading. I will try to explain you what is energy efficiency. Next, please. That's, in a way, efficiency is the same as productivity, except that when you speak efficiency is a ratio between output and input, if you want. And when you speak about efficiency, you consider that you will have the same activity with less input, with less energy. But if the idea is to optimize or maximize efficiency, you can also just, with the same input, have more output and more activities. So if the policies are aiming to improve energy efficiency, and if efficiency is just an end in itself, it leads to just more energy productivity. Next, please. And then that explains why you don't observe energy reduction while energy efficiency is rising. So I think really the rebound effects are systemic. That's quite difficult to for modeling because it is a complex system. But if you ask the question, if you save energy somewhere, where will it be used? You can imagine that you save energy through energy efficiency means at some point in some activities, but if you have infrastructures and markets which allow its redistribution, you won't have an energy reduction. So the rebounds are actually the interpretation that we can increase the number of activities with the same energy, and it's really what we see today. And we can even say, and that's interesting for policy, that rebounds are accelerated when infrastructures and markets can redistribute quickly energy. Next, please. So we have really to question energy demand and try to see how we can reduce energy. We all know that we are in an accelerated society, that our life rhythm are accelerated, that machines and appliances that were supposed to save time are just a way to pile up activities and practices to do several things at the same time. So in a way, energy efficiency, at least at the household or productive level, is translated into temporal efficiency. We can maximize the number of activities by unit of time and then maximize our power. At the same time, from a household point of view, you can say that social practices are more and more in competition to find their slot. Next, please. And so here I have to explain you a bit what what is the meaning of practice, social practice for me. Usually, there is two points of view about the relationship between society and energy. Either you consider that the social evolution depends upon energy expense. So you see energy as an input into the society, and that's a bit the diagram you have. Or from a more constructivist or sociologist point of view, you will say, okay, energy systems are basically socially constructed. They could have been otherwise. I can show you in the history, blah, blah, blah. But it never asked the question, what is energy for? We have really to open the black boxes of social practices in order to understand how we consume energy. Next, please. So, for social practice theory, the idea is really to have a new representation of society. You start with the axiom that society is made of only practices. That means that everything should be included in practices, and practices are constituted of heterogeneous elements. You can say material objects, images, skills, which are integrated as practices when something is done, when a practice is performed. With this approach, you can say also that individuals are recruited by practices, are obliged to do things through infrastructure, through objects, and so on. So you move your representation of people from actors, rational actors, to people who are living in a material world. And that's also an important approach to acknowledge how far social norms determine the way we do things in our daily life. Next, please. So that's usually in policy making, we hear that we have to change behavior. And I've listed here some questions that can be compared. The behavior-oriented and the practice-oriented will give way to very different questions. If you are centered on behavior and then on individuals, you will ask, why don't people turn the heating, cooling down at night? Why don't they install more efficient technologies? Why don't they install more insulation? And you will promote efficiency and retain current standards, as the document says. And your mean of investigation will be based on questionnaires to individuals. And you know that the social impact is very limited. Whereas, if you try to use practice theory, you will ask much larger and, I think, more interesting question. How do concepts of comfort come to be as they are? Comfort is a relative notion, so it's important to work on that notion and not to take it as granted. How are systems of practice sustained? How might this be reconfigured? And that's exactly what we have to do. And then you can also intervene in the reproduction of practices, not saying that people have to live at 20 degrees, but acknowledge the diversity and go far away from the average. That are usually informing the the policies. So I think this shows how far our minds are pervaded with ideas like behavior changed, and this, which is based on individuals and technology. We have really, I think, to move away from this paradigm. Next, please. So, the mainstream solutions are clearly based on market and technology, which means innovation, competition. And you can hear sometimes that competition is natural because in a Darwinian perspective, all species are competing for food. This is obviously false. In Darwin, you will find a lot of examples of cooperation between individuals and even between species. And what another biologist, Kropotkin, has shown is that Darwin has observed a lot of ecosystems where resources are abundant. And then, indeed, individuals can compete without too much harm for the species, but not obviously for the other individuals. And also that this competition is always costly, so is avoided when possible. But when resources are scarce, species cooperate together. You know, in the tundra in Siberia, where he did his observation, species have to cooperate if they want to survive. So we can say, by analogy, at least in the ecosystem with non-human living species, both competition and cooperation are part of the living processes. But cooperation operates always at a higher level, at the level of the species, and competition individuals. So in the hierarchical term, cooperation is more important for the species. Next, please. That's my conclusion. So, yeah. So, if we want to reduce energy demand, and we have to do, maybe we could ask the question as following: how should social practices cooperate? Today, social practices are in competition for individuals, but also between households, between countries, and so on. What does it mean that practice would cooperate? I think a way to answer to that question is to insert practices within ecosystems. It means that ecosystems are not outside of practices, but practices are part of some kind of ecosystems. Today, we have seen that we will have a big problem with renewable, which is intermittency. And then I think we have to learn how to consume energy when it is available and not to consume when it's not available. If not, we won't have, it will be very difficult to have enough energy. Today, as you know, when you require energy, you will get it at the pump, at the switch, or whatever. How can we learn all together to consume energy only when it is produced, namely when ecosystem can provide it? That, of course, requires a whole new social organization. You can imagine about work time, leisure time. You have to forecast how much energy you will have in 2 or 3 days. You will have a weather forecast to arrange things, but we will need to organize things totally different. And obviously cooperation will be required, if not, because it's the only way to face scarcity. And last but not least, we will have also to determine collectively what are the activities which are socially fair and ecologically sustainable. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, Grégoire. Thank you very much. That was a very dense presentation. Yes. I think you answered a lot of questions that I asked at the beginning about the correlation between energy volume, if I'm right, and GDP, that there is no absolute decoupling right now, most of all for carbon leakage and delocalization, as you said, and that we have strong limits to renewables, to efficiency energy, and that we have the rebound effect. I think that's quite important that you mentioned that, because that's something that I said several times to the European Commission, the rebound effect. I never had an answer about that, because I was the shadow reporter for the Greens on a lot of energy issues, and that's something that I don't understand that we don't include in the reflection. And I think that's the last commentary that you did is very important, is what is energy for? I think that's the key question that you did well, that's not yours, but that's you made the point, and that's about how we can adapt to the available energy in other country, and I think that's the key point. Effectively, right now we have more to find energy to go on with the way of life that we have, and maybe we have to make on the contrary and to adapt the social practices and norms to the energy really available. So I think that's a good way to go to the European Commission. What do you think about all of that? That you listen this with our two previous speakers. So you will have also 15 minutes, and good luck too.
Thanks. So I work for the European Commission. I work in the team in charge of modeling, of energy modeling of the energy system. And so I will present today some of our projection about supply and demand of energy in the EU. And hopefully I will touch upon several of these issues that have been presented here. So where are we now first? So first, we have basically achieved or already overachieved the target, the 2020 target, as they were put on paper. I say almost because after several years of decline, energy consumption has been increasing for the past couple of years. Why that is? Rebound effect, probably. Cheap oil, increased growth. This is somehow paradoxical because energy efficiency help us in achieving the other targets. Electricity consumption today is at the same level as in 2005. And this is due in part, or in significant part, to energy efficiency. We have also lived through a decoupling of emissions and economic growth, at least our emissions and our economic growth. This has started at the end of the 70s with the oil crisis, where energy efficiency measures started to have an impact on the emission. Finally, we have achieved some significant technological developments. We have renewables that are now either competitive on the market or about to become competitive on the market, depending on how you feel about fossil fuel subsidies. We had that investment in renewable last year in the world accounted for 2/3 of the power generation investment, of all the investment in power generation. This was driven mainly by solar PV investment, and half of which were made in China, which China is the largest investor and mainly investor in low carbon and clean energy technology because of air pollution issues, local air pollution issues. Investment in coal-fired power plant in China decreased by 55% in 2017. So this, no, sorry, if you could go back, thanks. We have electric cars now on the market, and we have also digitalization. I have an app today on my phone that allows me to check the energy and modify the energy consumption in my house if I ever wanted to install such a trapping. This will bring flexibility on the demand side, something that is extremely important. How do we cope with variability in the energy system? The energy system is designed to be flexible. The energy system is designed because we don't know, so that we can have energy whenever we want it. And this is why you have a series of measures to cope with variability. So far, the energy system has proven a lot more reliable than people would think of to variable renewables. And now we have the technology to also change the demand side, so to significantly change the consumption of energy on the base of the availability. So this will not be the solution to all problems, but it will help integrate variable renewable. Finally, we had structural changes in energy demand with a restructuring of the economy. The crisis has precipitated a restructured economy away from energy-intensive sources or energy-intensive activity towards more a service-oriented economy. We have put in place right now the 2030 Climate and Energy Framework with a great cooperation between the European Parliament and the European Commission. These targets are ambitious targets. We haven't achieved them yet. They will not be easy to achieve. They will not be cheap. And they will take us a long way towards decarbonization if we were to achieve them. However, they will not be enough to meet what are our legal engagement towards the Paris Agreement, so there will be an extra effort needed after the 2030 targets. Nonetheless, today we are in a very different position compared to where we were a few years ago or in 2011 when the first energy roadmap was made. Right now, back then we didn't know in which solution we could have used. It could have been CCS, it could have been nuclear, the hydrogen economy. And today we know that a lot of the decarbonization that we will achieve or that we will ever achieve, be it sufficient or not, will be done through renewable and energy efficiency. These are the cheap options that are available today and that are actually taking the world by storm, if you want to say this. Next slide. So what are the drivers for the future? What is in store for the future? In the next few years, we will for sure witness the rise of Asia and the global consumer class. By 2030, there will be 2 billion more humans joining the consumer class, for a total of 4 billion people that will want to travel, buy devices, and enjoy a nicer standard of living. This will put a very big strain on the resources that are already scarce in the economy, and it will also leave hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. In 2017, for the first time, we have less than 1 billion people living without electricity. And this will decrease dramatically by several hundred or more millions, mainly due to cheap renewables and microgrids in India and in other developing countries. It's not to say that all is good. There are still more than 2 billion people that have severe fuel poverty, living in severe fuel poverty, including the need to use kerosene lamps and high-polluting local biomass. So we will live through the increased effect of climate change that will become more and more evident, as beautiful days in Brussels seems to suggest. And this will also increase the global awareness around this problem. We will live through technological development, hyperconnectivity. Everybody will be connected to everybody else, and all this will require electricity. So this is to say that this change will happen regardless of what we do here in Brussels. Many of these changes we can only prepare for. We cannot modify more than a certain extent. Next slide. I have 3 graphs for you. This one shows our emission trajectory according to what are the current policies, the policy already in place, and how they are projected to be. Our 2030 target will get us somewhere above 45% of emission reduction in 2030 compared to 1990, if we get there, as we hope to do. And after that, even if we don't enact any other policy, even if we don't increase our ambition, ETS will still be there, the building codes will still be there, so new houses will still be more efficient, and by 2050 we will be somewhere around minus 60%. This is more an educated guess, but it will be somewhere around that. This will imply a large amount of variable renewable generation in the system, a very large amount, and it will be a challenge. This is for sure. You should think about 70% variable renewable in the grid. Power system will be almost completely decarbonized, either through renewable or other type of sources. Sorry, 70% is the total renewable, so there will be also renewable that are not variable, some biomass, but a lot of wind will be indeed wind and solar. So the share of some sectors like transport and agriculture, which are harder to decarbonize, will increase. However, it will be the share of a much smaller pie. Next. This is not enough to reach Paris Agreement. We will need to step up our ambitions again if we want to get there. Next slide, please. This graph shows energy consumption in the EU, which has been declining in the long term. So we did claim for a long time that we have decoupled our economic growth from our energy consumption. It's true that we have seen in the last year that it is not easy to do so. So energy efficiency will be with us. This is not the solution. We will not go to zero. It will not, as I will show later, that we will not decarbonize with energy efficiency for exactly the same reason that was pointed out before, that you cannot go to, you can increase productivity, but you cannot go to zero, or you will need infinite productivity. If you want to do something without energy, you have to be infinite productive. However, the option to reducing incrementally energy efficiency will be there in the future, but will not be, as I said, the only measure that we could have. With carbon-free electricity, fuel switching will become increasingly important. So we will switch from fuels that emit to fuels that do not emit. And there is here this creates a big difference between sectors. There are some sectors where energy consumption will not increase a lot because they will need to adopt measures that actually need more energy, that are inefficient, like the use of electricity in industry is not efficient. There will be more efficiency. This will compensate for the increased energy efficiency. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, next slide. So this figure, this is my last graph, shows the projected electricity consumption. This graph shows a shift, I think. On one end, we have an almost flat energy consumption for a number of years, and that it was exactly due to restructuring of the economy, but also to energy efficiency. However, in the long term, if we have renewables and energy efficiency that are available, that are cheap, then we will need those, to use those, to decarbonize even further. So we will increase our need of energy efficiency. I haven't seen any study that does not project a major increase of energy efficiency in the long term. We are on the low side at the European Commission. The point is that I make here is that we don't know exactly how. We know that we will need more electricity for power electric cars, for example. We don't know exactly how, and here energy efficiency can really make a difference. It's not the silver bullet. Renewables will not solve our problem. Energy efficiency will not solve our problems, but the two together will get us quite some way towards solving the problem. Next slide. Next slide again. So, how do we get all that renewable energy? Do we have it? Well, the sun is giving enough energy, and we do have enough land, in theory. The GRC made recently a study where they really calculate the amount of land available for wind turbines, taking into account all the restrictions, and in the average scenario, you put down all the windmill, and you can generate in 1 year all the electricity that, on average, on that year, Europe will need. Just not at the same time that we want to have it. The sun has even higher potential. If you put solar panels above all roofs and all parking lots and all area that is available, all with a 10% efficiency, this will still be cheap because the fuel is free. The panels are not expensive anymore. And they will generate many times the electricity that Europe will need, but only during the day, not during the night. So there, the chance will be to deliver that electricity to consumers when they want it at the right time. There will be flexibility needs. It's not only battery. You can have transmission lines when there is no wind in one part of Europe, there is wind in one other part of Europe, but you can transfer a certain part, not a very big amount. You can transport a lot less electricity on a cable than you can transport gas in a pipeline, for example, in terms of energy. You will need demand-side flexibility, for example, your washing machine or your car that charges at different time, depending on the weather forecast. But there is no hiding here that we will move into uncharted water. Last year in Denmark, 60% of the electricity consumed come from renewable, mainly wind variable renewable. They didn't have any major problem. They had negative prices of electricity. Negative prices is the normal market response to an excess of electricity, is the market signal that put in place flexibility instruments, that gives the revenue to put in place flexibility instruments to build a cable that buy electricity at a negative price and sell it in Germany at a positive price. So we can cope with that. Many countries done even better than that, but they have a lot of hydropower, that's true. However, you can think in the future to a future where almost every country in Europe will have to be far above what Denmark is today. And then, yes, that will be a challenge. And that will be something that we haven't experienced yet. So we see that the cost for energy, for power generation, will decrease in the future as solar power and wind power keep becoming cheaper. However, the cost for infrastructure will increase. And the two things will compensate, almost compensate each other in the long term. And we see there will be a need, or at least it's my opinion, we need to have a strategic approach towards the development of this infrastructure, not to build too much, not to build too less, or too little, and build the infrastructure, the smart infrastructure that we will need tomorrow, that we know will come, and it will take a long time to build it. So this is my final slide. I will use it as a conclusion. So we know electricity and energy efficiency can take us a long way, but not all the way. They cannot solve our problem. We cannot have infinite amount of any of those available. In the future, there will be different pathways. A bit of what was said before, we can try to do everything with technologies. We can try to have technologies that do exactly the same as we do today. They will be more expensive, but we can try to go in that solution at the same type of life that we have today. That might solve one problem without counting all the other problems of resource scarcity, but we could use some of those technology. Or we can have pathways where we have more change, behavioral change in our lifestyles. There is a big potential for changing our behavior, that could have a real impact on what we are doing. If we all stop eating red meat, there will be the amount of land that will be available will not be significant compared to the amount of fuel that we need to fly planes, for example. So if we could all go that, it will be a lot sustainable. We can use that energy, that savings, to do something else in the economy on the other side. However, as we have seen, the behavioral changes are not easy. They are not easy to plan. They are not easy to implement. And there is only a limited amount of regulation that you can pass that will change behaviors before you have rebound effects or the public opinion turns against you. But still, between these two extremes, between the technological improvement and the behavioral change, we will have to find the pathways which is the best, the most optimal for our society, and the most affordable, considering that there will be challenges, there will be opportunities, and a lot that will happen to Europe will happen regardless to what we can think here. There will be changes that we cannot stop. We start in a much better position than many other countries right now. We have already done experience like this. We have a high standard of living, and we have a policy that we can start to build on. And then I would like to conclude maybe saying that I think that this will be our second energy transition. The first one happened when we started using fossil fuels, when we started using energy which was a lot more dense, a lot more concentrated, and that accumulated over billions of years. It is that energy that gave us our standard of living today, that gave us these institutions. Unfortunately, we are using it much farther that that type of energy can be restored by nature, and so we'll have to change again our way to use energy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your very complete and sincere view on the European Commission policies. I think that you gave some good points. I think you made a good point recording the situation, regardless we want or not, the future of next years that we will have will be based on geopolitics, with the Asia role, with the technology, hyperconnectivity, climate change, geopolitics. That's quite clear. I think that we all have to take it into account to make a scenario for the future. And I think you make clear the points about the European Commission based on energy efficiency, as we know, on more renewables, electric cars, for example, and more integrated market. I think that's the path that the European Commission is following right now, and I can say that I'm saying that in all the trilogues that we are doing now. And I think that you made some point, and I can see that we have some differences about the analysis.
I thought we
agreed. Some differences, but we have too some things in common. When you said, for example, we have to change behaviors, I think that was the point that was made before. I think that was quite clear. The way of life was energy for. Now that's important to see the points in common that we have. When you say that we have to reduce meat consumption, I think that's quite clear about that for a lot of reasons, but that's a climate change and energy reason too. But I think that we have a very different way to see things between the different speakers, but decoupling. I think that's one of the key points that I can see here, because I've got two speakers saying that we are not decoupling economic growth and energy use, and you said that you are seeing that in Europe we're doing that. No, that's not a question. That's a question I ask to everybody. So you. And that's interesting, because that's something that's in the European Parliament. That's a discussion that we have once more and once more and once more all the time. So maybe you can make more your point, or you just can have these 5 minutes to make some other points that you listen to other speakers, just to have a fluid debate around us. Maybe, I don't know if you want to begin on the contrary.
Let me qualify that. We have seen some trends of relative reduction in energy use, a relative increase in economic growth, so that we have seen. We have also seen energy consumption growing again. So I don't know how long that decoupling or this diverging trend, or how far it can be pushed. To me, it's clear that we cannot be pushed all the way and to solve our problems. But it can make a difference. We can use the level of energy that people in vast part of the world use, people that in Asia use. We can use the same level of energy as they use, and we can do it today without lowering dramatically our standard of living. In many cases, we will improve our standard of living. So I'm not saying that we decoupled. I'm not saying, I say that there are trends, and energy efficiency can get us a good way to solve some of the issues that we see today.
Do you want to...
If I can comment, a few comments about it, because, I mean, this is, in my view, getting back to my original statement, that we are living in different reality, and we are using different... different storytelling. I mean, one elephant in the room that I found in this presentation is that if you're looking at the flags of the European Union, the blue is the amount of oil that we are importing, and the yellow is the amount of oil produced inside Europe. So we are totally dependent on import of oil at the moment. And it's more than 80 or something percent. No? Yeah. Then if we are serious of the drivers that the rest of the world is becoming developed, that China will take over, things like that, it is not sure how much this cheap importing at the moment will remain cheap or available in the future, because also there are some change in the equilibrium in the world that is changing the wind about the fact the weight of Europe in the world. So it is not sure that we will have access to all this amount of energy and at this very low level of price. So one important point is when you say we want to be alternative, let me see if we are not even capable of producing 10-20% of renewable, including hydropower. Hydropower you cannot increase much more. How we will suddenly in 20 years. Then there is a nice slide. I don't know if we can go back to your slides, the slide number 4. Of the quick decarbonization, because this is, to me, is fascinating. I don't know how the models are done. Basically, if you can go to that one, yeah, exactly, this one. Okay, we are saying basically that in 20 years we will build 40 times more power capacity in terms of wind things, roads, rebuild the total infrastructure, making grid, high-speed line across Europe, build a new fleet of electric cars, whatever, and who is building all these things? Because if we are doing all these things using fossil energy, we will have an increase in emission, not a decrease. So I don't know how the model is done, but I mean, if we would like to have some project about how much energy will be required to build all the power capacity and the consuming capacity that will be required for this substitution, I'm not sure how reliable is this type of, this is why I was saying that probably it would be better to use storytelling rather than models, because the models are tricky. Another important thing is, this is the fairy tale of Denmark, guys. Denmark is a small country in the middle of Europe. So when they need electricity, they buy from them. And when they have excess of electricity, they sell it. They can do it. At the end, it's over, and that's it. Germany is not that Germans are less smart than the others. Simply the Germany is so big that they cannot do the trick. So this works well in Denmark, but it cannot work in the rest of Europe. So please, let's stop the story that the Denmark goes 100% of alternative, because it's a special situation generated in a special place. And other things, we are decreasing the coupling. We are printing 1 trillion euros per year, guys, and we are importing from China. So, of course, this made possible to eliminate the most energy-intensive things because China is producing for us. And, of course, this implies that our emissions go down compared. But, guys, this is the point, that unless we start having a system of representation of what's going on, a little bit more elaborated, that can take in consideration the factors that are relevant for making a discussion, using a number here and there really is just misleading. This was my effort in my first things. All these models never realized that the energy vendor, they throw 200 billions, 200,000 millions in the garbage, and 200 millions for biofuel, I think. So maybe we should start to get better model or better understanding of how it works, because we are going with statements that everyone uses because they are very nice to imagine that they are true, but unfortunately they are not. This is...
Wait. You want to do it? Yeah. Anyway, we'll go back. You will. No.
Yeah, I think as the representative of the European Commission, you are a bit framed by the targets were taken by at Paris, for instance. But I would like to know whether you realize that these targets are not enough. I've shown different graphs for CO2 carbon budget, for the steep declining of CO2 emissions, and then so the framing of the European Commission is still, I think it's very ambitious at the world level, but not totally insufficient for climate reasons. And that's quite scary. And then afterwards, you come with quite classical answer, flexibility for households. I've got several researchers going on that, and I can tell you it will be very, very difficult unless you trigger real change. And I had this idea, I've already suggested to different people in different circles, and I think rather than changing winter or summer hour, the Commission should experiment blackouts. But I mean planned blackouts. So you will tell people, okay, we won't have any electricity for, well, you can begin with 1 hour, you can begin a Sunday, then you expand, and you can choose the area where you can secure the areas when you've got hospital security, because we have to learn to get not to consume electricity. So we will realize the true value of electricity when we won't have it. So I think we will need this kind of social experiment at large scale. And that would be, I think, much better measures than just voting on winter, summer hour.
It's a fascinating proposition, and you should tell the elected member here on the Parliament, but perhaps wait after elections to do that.
No, before the elections.
Exactly.
Maybe you want to say some words before going to the questions, because I saw some good interacting debate, so I like that. So maybe you can say some words.
So about flexibility, it was done something. I know that is difficult. I remember an experiment done here in Belgium by one of the utility company, when they said at some point, they sent me an email and they said, "Hey, do you want to participate? We will send you an SMS sometime this evening to see if you can lower your power consumption, because we want to simulate what happens if the nuclear power plant doesn't really restart this winter." And I took part, and I received the SMS, I switched off some lights, and I think that all in all, they saved 200 megawatt hour, which is the size of a gas-fired power plant. So I do agree it's difficult. I do agree that perhaps a good blackout would be a better way to save energy. But it is something. These amounts are not insignificant. Also, personally, I'm very aware that it's not enough, that our targets are getting more and more difficult, and as ambitious and as expensive as they are, we are in a serious situation. So Paris said that we should limit emission by 2 degrees with the ambition of going to 1.5 degrees. And they say 1.5 because they know that 2 degrees might not be enough. And they say ambition because 1.5 will be difficult and will be expensive. And that extra mile, if you have all this objection to renewables, going that extra 0.5% would be a significant challenge, let's say. And how do I know this? From models. Models that do take into account the energy used to produce. They do take into account a fairly complete representation of the energy system. That they are highly imperfect, but I think we're getting some experience with it, and for the 2020 targets, we were in the right order of magnitude, in this right ballpark. We said, okay, we can get it 2020, there, without wrecking the economy, and that was more or less correct. It was other problems in the economy, but none related to that. So we don't have a blind trust. We should not have a blind trust in this model, but behind those, the energy balance adds up. So you know that how much energy is produce is consumed on the other side. You know how much how you balance with renewables. There is some limited representation in there, so the number that they come out, they are not totally random numbers, and they could give some insight, I think.
Thank you very much. Can you? Yeah, thank you. Now we're going to take some questions. Some questions, yeah. I see that we're a lot of. Wow. Well, all the rooms wants to say something. That's very cool. We have some. I will take maybe 5 questions in a round or remark, and then I think I got a question then because we have some people that are following on the web stream. Hi, everybody, and so we have some questions in this tool called Slido. So we'll take one run around. So let's begin this way. So maybe not you, because you first, because you raised the hand first. So just please be short in your intervention and present yourself at the beginning, just to know who you are.
So, yeah. Julia Steinberger, University of Leeds. And I'm going to be short and to the point, but I'm also a little bit angry because some of us have actually been researching this topic, and I think it's very important that the new economics is not the same as the old economics. And I noticed the certain gender imbalance between the panel and the room, as well as some people who are experts and who've been working on this for, let's say, a decade. So, you know, nothing personal. In particular, nothing was said at all about the needs side. So one of the things that has been very evident in my research and that we're talking about more and more, it's not just me, you can talk about human needs. You can talk about human needs as being multidimensional, non-substitutable, and most importantly, satiable. In a paper published in Nature Sustainability earlier this year, one of the things we showed is that if you satisfy human needs, that leads to life satisfaction. The more needs you satisfy, the higher life satisfaction is. These things have consequences. You can measure the fact that they're satiable, and you can measure the fact that as you satisfy them, they lead to well-being. So economic growth is not required for this. And also when you're talking about need satisfaction over time, you can also see real decoupling happening. And that's very important as well. So I think that we're talking about ideas when we take in what consumption means and what energy uses mean, you can start talking about decoupling at scales that are completely beyond the scope of anything that's been discussed so far. And I think that that's really important to bring into our current debates about how to change the economy. These are things that you can measure, and these are things that you can study. And one of the things that you come up with is you come up against the political economy of supply chains, how energy is used and what it delivers and how it traps people into certain behaviors. It's not just individual behavior, it's collective, as Grégoire has talked about very eloquently. Has to do with the political economy, and we're talking about big things like the fossil fuel extractive industry, and we're talking about big things like the automotive industry. These industries have to either disappear or change beyond recognition. I would say they both have to disappear. So I'm just putting that out there, that this is something that we need to talk about very specifically when we're talking about making energy and need satisfaction connected.
Thank you very much. Here, and you're totally right on gender balance. Nothing to say about that.
There we go. You can hear me. Thank you all so much. I was wondering, my name is Marlene Sahakian. I'm a sociologist working at the University of Geneva, primarily on consumption issues. And I was wondering if the theme of sufficiency is coming up at all in these discussions at the level of the European Union. I mean, finally, the problem that Grégoire posed around efficiency leads to broader issues, which are the focus on wanting to improve technological systems or efficient behaviors, looking at single individuals as units of change. Sufficiency proposes a different dynamic. It suggests overall reductions in consumption and energy usage, and it could result in things like caps on square meter usage per person so that we can reduce the needs around heating homes. It could mean blackouts, but overall it means changing our habits when it comes to how we consume. And I noticed that in your presentation you talk about the theory of planned behavior when it comes to individual change. I wonder if you're engaging with other theories of change, such as social practice theories from sociology and other disciplines. Thank you.
Yes, hello, my name is Eero Yrigoskinen. I work for Green Budget Europe here in Brussels. I have actually two questions. One relates to an element which has not been addressed so far. It concerns internalizing the external costs of the current economic system, meaning using the price mechanism through fiscal measures by putting extra burden on taxes for products that consume more raw materials and produce more emissions. So I would like to hear your view about that. And then another one relates to the aim of increasing the share of renewables. Obviously, we probably all agree that this is our common objective, but on the other hand, the current dependency on fossil fuels is on average over 80% of our energy consumption. So if you intend to replace that by raw materials and developing the whole infrastructure and building different kinds of windmills and solar panels and whatever they are, how are we going to find the necessary raw materials for that? What kind of climate and environmental impacts will that have? And does the Commission think that, for instance, traceability and sustainability should be an element to be taken into account when discussing about the energy transition? Thank you.
Fulcini Martini, FM Consultants. In this very interesting presentation, I have not heard the definition of distributed energy. Distributed energy is the energy of the future because it will be produced in houses, compounds, buildings, villages, even towns, totally independently from grid and from power station. There will be a reduction in transmission losses. There will be a reduction on investment in large plants. And this is today the future. Of course, it will take lots of time because of the lobby of the electricity company who are interested in large plants. But villages, and I presently work in several villages which has been made totally autonomous. And actually this autonomy is sometimes, like in the United States, used as a storage for charging automobiles, electric cars, and distribute in nearby villages and so on. So I think it's very important that to give consideration to distributed energy because it's really the future of the electricity production. Thank you.
I will take one more question from the screen. So I will read the question from the screen because we have people, as I said, that are following by live stream. So the question is, comparing GDP with primary energy consumption may be misleading since it mainly shows the 50%, 70% of losses and waste of the primary energy flow of 13 terawatt or more. Well, that's the question. I don't know if you... So, but we will do a first round. After we'll do a first round of questions. If I'm right, we had a question about the need side, where the question of sufficiency versus efficiency, where the question about internalizing external costs and raw materials, and where a question about the distributed energy. So you have the floor. Just be brief in your answer in order to have some more questions because all the room wants to speak.
Very quickly, you have to get in our shoes. We are asked to talk for 10 minutes, 15 minutes about what is the future of energy. And of course, in 15 minutes, if you want to give some meaningful things, you cannot address all the possible aspects of the problem. This was exactly the attempt that I was saying. At the moment, we do not have a good representation of the process of producing and consuming energy. And consuming energy has to do with what are the definition of what are the needs, so where we are investing our energy. Sufficiency, yes, but the problem is that there is a session on sufficiency, if I understand well, that will be this afternoon, no? So, I mean, we have to address one thing at a time. We cannot address everything. There was a study of the credit card. You get a certain amount of energy to consume in a year. You have to decide where to put it. And okay. So the internalization of the externality is very interesting, but the point is that at the moment we are subsidizing energy. This is another point. Nobody realized that all the energy sector is either in developing countries is subsidized, because energy is needed to run the economy. So no government wants to. So this is another point, that we are assuming that we can do whatever we want. The reality is that guaranteeing the access to energy to people is primary to government, and you end up by getting a lot of subsidies, more in fossil energy alternatives. And unless we are not starting to understand better how energy is used, why, by whom, to do what, and what type of energy, all these questions will remain unanswered, because the actual model we are having are not capable of a discriminatory power to make this distinction. That it goes to the mystery question from the net, is in reality there is no energy. You have primary energy sources, they are stock, no renewable. Primary energy sources, they are renewable. This energy which is mechanical, like wind, hydro, and electricity. Energy that is chemical, like fuel. So then our secondary energy, tertiary energy, when you're getting a return from the waste of energy. We are using energy in a very sloppy way. There is no, if we don't start learning how to call different energy forms with their proper name and what they do and how, we are in the total chaos. That is where we are at the moment in the discussion of energy. So that not even the question can be answered or understood properly. I believe that he is referring to the fact that gross primary energy would be what you require to make your energy carriers. So if you're using electricity, you need 2.6 of primary and thermal energy to have one. But it depends, because if you do it with wind, it's no longer the case. Then, you know that there is a lot of confusion also in relation to the relation between energy and GDP. There's been a long story about the electricity is more valuable than the other, so the correlation is better if you have a quality factor for the use of electricity, and then you got much better. I mean, this is extremely complex. But again, these points are the point that unless we are a little bit more complex in the way we are describing this issue, we are getting sloppy characterization, and everything goes, because we can never address, identify the different factors that are relevant for the different things.
Regarding the issue of human need and sufficiency, we do take them into account. He's more my colleague in DG Clima than me. He's more the research than DG NR. I think they are not only important, I think they are essential. I don't think we will get to solve our problem without a deep change in our lifestyle. My point is that we cannot wait for that to happen. We need to start now with what we have available. We need to start now with raising awareness with campaign, and also with renewable energy. By the time, and without forgetting this issue, without forgetting that we have to convince not only Europeans, but many more people to live a more sustainable life, but this does not mean that we don't have to make targets for 2030, for 2020, and for 2040. Regarding the internalization of external cost, yes, this is what we try to do. This is what we try to do with the ETS, where we put a price on the emissions. There are two ways of doing that. Either you calculate the cost of the pollution and the benefits, and you minimize them both at the same time. But then it's difficult to set the targets. So what happens, for example, if China decided it's not decarbonizing anymore, and then you don't have any benefit anymore because Europe doesn't make a difference. So then what you do is that you say that, okay, we know that our cost will be higher than our benefits. It will cost less to tackle climate change than not to do nothing. We know this is the safest way, so we make a target for that, and now our cost of reduction is the most cost-efficient way to reach that target. And in setting the target, you try to take into account all the cost of all the benefits to the best of your knowledge, and that's exactly how we should do it, or we try to do it. About the issue of traceability and sustainability, yes, absolutely. This is something that we look at. We try to work with life cycle analysis. A solar panel produces much energy in the first 2 or 3 years as it was used to make it, and it lasts for 30 plus years, 25, possibly even more. So we do try to take that into account, and yes, we see emerging new type of constraints, new type of dependency on materials, on lithium, and on other things, with new challenges for the environment that we will have to tackle. There is a difference in if you buy a capital asset that you can use a windmill. Once you buy it, you can use it for 30 years, or if you depend on a weekly shipment of fossil fuel, which can be cut in the middle of winter. This is why, for example, you hear that problems with dependence on natural gas from Russia, but you don't hear about dependence from nuclear fuel, which we are almost as much dependent from because you can store nuclear fuel. Regarding distribution, yes, I didn't have the time to go into the detail. We do see a lot more distributed generation. We see different models of operating the market with power purchase agreements, PPAs, with energy cooperative at the local level. And that's what I mean, that we need a strategic approach to infrastructure, because you will still need, maybe much less, but you will still need that transmission infrastructure for that time where in a region in the winter you don't have enough energy, but you will still have to pay for the whole cable to the neighboring country, even if you use it only 1 week per year. But we do take that into account, so we do see that a lot of that rise in renewable will come from distributed sources, not just from centralized power plants. Anything?
Yeah, just to take the question about the correlation between GDP and primary sources. As far as I understand the question, that's true that the correlation is quite right, and you could incurve it if the mix change. You can incurve it a bit, but not as much as it would be needed to reach climate or other targets. Well, I'm concerned also about the tax questions because I work also on fuel poverty. I know that taxation will be always socially unfair, always. So it's why usually when you do that at a household level, policy do that, they forecast some social measures, and it's very complex. And also it doesn't prevent rich people to consume. Okay, they will pay more. So it's not, for me, very efficient in the sense it might be cost effective, but it's not efficient in the sense that you won't reach the target to really reduce energy consumption, or at least CO2 emission. And about distributed energy, I think that's an very interesting way to make people concerned about energy. I know that it won't be enough to supply the whole society, but I can see a very interesting movement of cooperative in Europe around decentralized and distributed energy, and that's really a way to get people involved and interested in energy. And so I think that's a good reason to invest in this distributed sources.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the proposal, because that's a very concrete proposal about cooperatives. You should know that we talk about that in the recast of the energy reform here in the European Parliament with the European Commission. So let's go that way. I try to take everyone on board. That's so many people that here. And after you. Wait.
Yeah, okay, that's on. Thank you very much. My name's Lucy. I work for an environmental charity called Julie's Bicycle, based in London. This may sound like salacious gossip, but I've heard that the IPCC are having to do some major remodelling because of the basically carbon capture and storage and other geoengineering, the effects being massively overstated previously. And also that due to internal disagreement regarding nuclear, it might not actually be included in the current and future IPCC report. Whether or not this is true or just anecdotal, it sounds like a lot of our top climate scientists are also still grappling with technology and clean and green growth. And certainly every time I've heard Nick Stern talking about IPCC reports, they also use the reference and framing of green or clean growth. I personally find this majorly problematic. Is it all just for political expedience, or how do we get them to be a bit more challenging about this topic?
Which one? Oh, okay, thank you. First, I'd like to ask to thank you for to giving a picture of that we are really in trouble. My name is Jan Juffermans from the Dutch Footprint Group, and I think we need new tools, more than we heard up to now, which are integrated, fair and green and effective. And I'd like to give two examples we are using in Holland. One is from James Hansen, carbon fee and dividend. Just you tax on the source for gas, oil, and coal, just very heavy tax, and you give every person €1,000 per year to change their situation. And the second is even more effective. We think we might need it when we are really in trouble, and we are already much in trouble. That is using rationing or quotas. You might know the model from David Fleming from the United Kingdom, to give everyone a quotum of CO2 per year, and everyone will become very creative to use his quotum, and also companies will adapt to it to deliver products with small footprints. So that is with CO2, a next step should be to include the footprint quota, because as soon as you have a CO2 quotum, people will flee to use more arable land. So we have to include later on the land and the land grabbing in this model. So I really wonder if you know more research on quotas and rationing, and if maybe here people are beginning with it, because we might need, within 10 years, a new model to get out of this problem.
My name is Dirk van Orshoven. I'm an independent energy engineer here in Belgium. I think all three presentations were very interesting and very pertinent. The most challenging for me was the one of Mr. Wallenborn, and I'm not sure if I grasped it very well. And so I have a question on one example. One of the slides you showed two columns, one with behavior and another with practice. Could you explain this a little bit more? Because I still don't understand very well what practice means and how to change it. For the practical example, insulating our buildings, is it not necessary anymore? Does practice mean that every year we lower the thermostat by 1 degree so that after 15 years we don't need any heating anymore? But in the meantime we don't need to insulate anymore? Or do we still need to insulate but we don't change the behavior? How then will we insulate? So I don't grasp it. Can you explain it by this example or in a general way? Thank you.
Yeah, Jonathan from the Institute for Future Fit Economies from Germany. I have two questions. The first one is about what's the overall contribution of this conference, and it might actually be that post-growth researchers are here and people from policymaking are here, and we can learn from each other, right? I mean, that's also sends up this panel. So, as Julia has already mentioned before, there has been huge efforts in actually understanding what are the driving mechanisms behind the transition and why is it so hard. And two have been mentioned on the panel, which are rebound effects on the one hand and leakage effects on the other hand, like shifting production from Europe, for example, to China. So I'm wondering whether the Commission actually takes these mechanisms into consideration when you do, for example, impact assessments, and whether there should maybe a better bridge between these two discourses, because from what I've heard, I thought it's still neglected. That was the one question. The second one is about the internalization of carbon emissions or external effects. And you mentioned, you didn't mention the ETS, but I mean the ETS is the instrument to actually achieve the goal you mentioned. So what are your plans of further developing the emission trading system in the European Union? Because currently just 50% of the emissions are covered, and if only 50% are covered, you will actually still have leakage effect to other sectors, which will probably not lead to the or not fulfill the goals you mentioned here. Would happy to get your feedback on that. Thank you.
I'm Texas student. So my question was about the two challenges you were talking about, like climate change and peak of oil, but no one talk about the fact that we need cheap energy in order to build green energy infrastructures. So we need at least dozens of times more steel, copper, and other kind of rare earths in order to make wind turbines or photovoltaic panels. So when we will have the peak of oil, the price will get kind of high, so way too expensive in order to get a transition. And also, we didn't talk about, like really not at all, about other kind of challenges such as the rise of fascist movement, the fact that the people in power having the benefits of all this all the GDP we make so far are not willing to have the benefits getting lower. You can see this in France and in other countries. There is more and more repressions against movement willing to have a better wealth distribution. So it's more likely that we won't have a smooth transition and more like a collapse. So how do you deal with this? How should we act? Like it's more likely it won't happen from a top-down perspective. So what kind of struggle should we organize and how to spread this kind of word in the more mainstream world? Thank you.
Well, that's an easy question. This one, very related to the second one that I can see on the slide on the screen. Do you think that we are actually more trying to mitigate the economic collapse due to the peak oil rather than doing any ecological transition? So I think that's really related to what you say. So the question that we have, you don't have to answer everything, just answer the thing that you can answer, and you can just put something. But we have a question about green and clean growth, as you said, about FICC, about the Hansen proposal, the quota, most of all. What do you think about the quota? What do you think about the difference? I think that's for you, behavior and practices. And I think that the question is very pertinent about peak oil, because, that's a good question about the cheap energy to make renewables. That's, I think, very clear, because the renewables are very linked to the fossil fuels in that case, and I think that's something that we don't talk about today, and the relation between energy and fascism. And that's, you can do, no, that's a very, very, I think that's something central that we talk a lot about, because that's true, as if you generate frustration, for example, with this kind of growth, well, fascism can be a response and answer to that. So maybe that's going to be beyond this panel concretely, but I think that's a central question that you ask. So you want to begin, Maria?
Yeah, yes. I can go very quickly. About the reliability of IPCC, I prefer no comment. I share your concern. About the rebound effect externalization, I absolutely agree. As a matter of fact, we have another project called Euphoria, and then we were looking exactly to this. And if you are not considering these two factors, you're going to make any relation between what change you are doing to the economy and what happened. Because If you are increasing efficiency, the economy will become something else. A more efficient car became a four-wheel driver with air conditioning. So it's not simply that it's driving more miles, it's become a different type of car. So it's very difficult to handle in quantitative term scenarios of the effect of change in efficiency. And externalization, to me, this is the elephant in the room with all the discussion. I mean, the developed society, you were mentioning if we became vegetarian, we spare land. No, because all the feed getting in Europe is coming from Latin America, others. So there is no relation whatsoever about what we think may happen and what happens in reality, because Europe works on externalization. Just to give you an example, the second exporter of food in the world is the Netherlands, which is exporting more than Argentina and Canada together. They have 80 times more land than the Netherlands. Why is that? Because they are importing and re-exporting. And by tripling, they have 3 times more increase in the volume, and they reduce 25% the farmers in the last 10 years. So what happened is that this is nothing to do with agriculture, it's manufacturing. The agribusiness is manufacturing. Still, we have models that cannot detect the fact that we do not have in the Netherlands an agricultural sector. This is a manufacturing sector, and still they are discussing it like if they were farmers. As a matter of fact, they are eliminating the farmers very actively. So, I mean, this, again, we should have better understanding and better representation of what is happening, because at the moment, it seems to me, the last thing is just, I can offer you a job as a student, because I think that you get very, very important points. The cost of transition, I'm not sure we have the resources available to do everything new at the moment by keeping running the system. We are making debt to pay pensions. It's not clear from where we will get this huge amount of resources to make all these things, which resources without increasing emission. But the most important part is the fascist part of the war. If we are keeping, yes, we can, if there is no problem, with some of innovation we solve all the problem, then if we are not solving the problem, we have to blame someone. Then it's automatic that if this is not happening, because they are the one they are opposing. So this is something that is fueling the violence or the blaming game. If you are saying, guys, we have some major problem and we don't know how to solve it, let's start discussing how to solve our problem, it is much easier that we avoid the growth of fascism, of violence. Because the truth is, we don't have the slightest idea how to do it. And at the moment, we don't have a solution for our sustainability problem. Be honest and let's build from here. And we should try to explore, and this is the growth movement, in my view, is much richer than the other. Let's explore bottom-up different things to do. The top-down, we already know, we put more money in the bank, doesn't work. It worked very well in the past. It's no longer working now. So doing more of the same or something that is not working is not smart. Let's try something else. If the 200 billions they were spent in the energy event they were given in rural areas of Germany to try to do something else, probably we would have out something better than what we got so far. A lot of windmill so I believe that this is an important point. Let's start with the fact we do not know. Let's see what we can do, not that we know. Because if we know and we don't do, it's someone else that is has to be blamed for it. And this is a recipe for disaster in the situation we are in.
Okay, regarding IPCC, yes, we know, or CCS and nuclear, well, yes, we know there are technologies that didn't work. Luckily, there were other options that we had, which worked better than expected, with cheaper solar panels. So it is an issue, and it's easy to, blame something that IPCC has done in the past, but after all, I think a lot of the science done there was more or less robust, at least in the pessimistic part of saying how difficult it will be. And let's see which kind of options we will have in the future. CO2 quota, yes. I think these are all things that we'll have to experience with in the future, and it's good that we start seeing this type of measure coming up, and with evaluation of what is the potential for that. Pretty much everything has a potential. Every measure has a potential attached to it. Regarding the rebound effect and the leakages, so yes, we do try to take into account rebound effect, and we know that they are difficult to kind of measure, and also to constraints. We know that energy measures, they don't work sometimes, but they don't work because people don't want to change their behavior, because people rebound back. So this is an issue on how you convince people actually to have a more efficient lifestyle, or a more energy-saving lifestyle, not only when there is a recession and the price of oil are high, but also when there is economic growth and the price of oil are not in the newspaper. For the leakage, I mean, keep in mind that we emitted most of the CO2, like the Western nation, we emitted most of the CO2 that is in the air, so we could not just simply go into China and say, listen, we don't know if it's possible to decouple energy with GDP, but you are the one that have to start doing first, because you are so much larger than we are. So in making carbon budget and enacting force, first we also realize that developing nations have more of the carbon budget that we do have. ETS and effort sharing, there are some sectors that are not suitable for ETS and trading. The whole point of the ETS is that you can find reduction where it's cheaper. There is no other reason for it to be. And for things like agriculture or a personal car, it's very difficult to achieve. The transaction costs are too high, or it's too impractical, or it just will not make a difference. If you have to pay the ETS price and you try to reduce emission from transport with the cost of 10, 20 euros per ton of CO2, you will not get any effect. So there is an effort sharing directive with a target for non-ETS sector, and we know that reduction in those sectors will have to become more and more important, and the target there will have to be more and more ambitious, but with other instruments that is not an ETS. What else? And then about maybe climate change, peak oil, and fascism. Well, it's not. This is not really my role to go into this type of. In politics, we are just here to try to put the regulation, the best possible regulation that we see in the future. I don't think that populism is on the rise in Europe because we risk to miss the energy efficiency target, or because of the cost of renewables in Europe. It's on the rise for other reasons, which are largely independent from energy and from CO2 emission, at least at this point. Not that climate change didn't have an impact, but this is not what caused the rise of populism. And so this also shows that how difficult it is to change people's behavior. If people, they want economic growth and they want more consumerism, be they be in the US or in China, you have to convince them to change their behavior. And for insulation, I personally think you should do both. You should insulate your house, and then you should try to see what your comfort are, but you should definitely do both.
Okay. For the quota of CO2, that's a very nice idea on paper. Many studies have tried to develop this idea, and I've shown that it's very, very complicated, difficult, maybe impossible. So I suggest that you come after to me. I will give you a lot of references if you're interested. But that's a good idea because you will distribute the same share to everybody. So it's yeah, it seems a very good idea, but well, I won't go further into the So yeah, to come to this difference of really of thinking, it's usually you say, okay, you can either make buildings or machines more efficient or change behavior. So you are dividing the world into species of objects, the living bodies, humans, and then all the materialities and so on. And so it's difficult to see the connection. So then you ask this kind of question, well, but people should insulate their roofs. That's economically sound. The return on investment is very short. Why don't they do that? Okay, you don't. So there is a lot of assumption when you ask this kind of question. Oh, people should be rational. That's quite easy to insulate your roof, and so on. And if you go into the other perspective, then you will have to consider that it's not a person, it's a family who lives in their house. What does it mean to insulate? Okay, they would like to do it, but there are so many other practices. So you will put the activities within their materialities to understand how they live, what are the things they are doing, how they are connected, and then you can begin to have another story about why people don't insulate their home. And I'm not saying they don't have to do that, and that obviously that would be nice. But you can realize that maybe what would be interesting also is to see that if you want to really insulate homes, you need to insulate by the exterior, which means that then you will have to do all the streets, because for urban reasons, they won't accept the difference of layer of deepness. Then you will go to a collective renovation of houses. Yeah, but that's difficult because the owners and so you begin to investigate also into the materialities of lives, and it's not just a question of behavior change. Each time I hear behavior change, there is a light that's switched on, and I say, no, not yet. You don't understand that we are just not just minds outside the world. We are really embedded in our relationships towards buildings, objects, others, and so on. So that's really important for me not to use behavior change, because that's a reduction of the issue. And at the end, energy and democracy have long-standing relationships, and I haven't time to do a lecture on that. But I think that the question was more addressed to the whole assembly than just the panel here. And I've just observing that maybe one of the most interesting social movements which arose these last years is the climate movement, and especially the civil disobedience around coal mines in Germany and the Gelände. And that's because they gather thousands of people ready to do something collectively against coal mines. So that's I invite you to have a look to this movement. Thank you.
Thank you. I will take the last questions before the last rounds of conclusion by the speakers. So I've got on the last round, you're over there. I will go back to the front. So be short, please, because we are also just have 10 minutes to.
Hello? Is it okay? Yeah? Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm Mariana Wilnitsky from Alternativas Económicas. I'm a journalist. I'm sorry if I don't know enough about energies. But I was just wondering, because in a place like Spain, you know, we have if we have a lot of sun, so it's very easy to get energy from the sun, if you want. You have a lot of, but you have a lot of poor people, so it's very difficult. I mean, it's not a thing that the people do not want to change the behavior. It's very difficult to change the behavior if you don't have the money to do it. So so I know that in Denmark they give money to the people to change the house, to renovate the houses, and to put panels and to isolate. I don't know, but I was wondering how much, if you have a plan for the poor countries, for the poor people, in order to improve the energy efficiency of the houses, especially in poor countries. That is. Thank you.
Hello. My name is Christian Kirschner. I'm an assistant professor at Maastricht University and Model University. My question is, well, first, to not be misunderstood, I completely agree with what you said, that we cannot carry on with the same system as we have using renewables. So that's out of question. And I very much would support Mario's position also in terms of the energetic analysis. The only thing that I've changed my mind on when I moved to the Czech Republic was that I suddenly realized I was on the same side of the argument of the bad guys, so to say, of the utilities. They would have been, had I engaged with them, very happy about the arguments that renewables are intermittent and cause problems, because that's actually what they are saying already. And they are arguing in favor of investing more money into the coal mines, keeping them open, develop further fossil fuels, because all the other stuff is just foolishly playing around. So that's when I started to think of the Energiewende a bit differently, and ask myself, it was a crazy project, but aren't we in a situation where we actually need such crazy projects, and it's better to invest that money in crazy projects like that than to subsidize fossil fuel companies or other items of our fossil fuel economy? Because, as you know, we have subsidies because we have a fossil fuel high net energy economy, and we can invest these large surpluses that we get from that wherever we want. So isn't it, in your opinion, better to do crazy stuff like renewables? Because it's not going to happen really that you give it to small farmers, as you suggested, but it's rather going to happen that it goes to other crazy things, or building nuclear power plants, for example. So what's your view on that?
Thank you very much. Silvia Lorik from the Sustainable Europe Research Institute. I'd like to follow up on the point of sufficiency. So you seem to assume that sufficiency is mainly something which is based on voluntary simplicity, which I think was coming up on another comment as well. However, sufficiency, at least it is understood in the Enough network, which brings together researchers working on the issue, sufficiency is something mainly coming from a perception of a precautionary principle and to have absolute reductions of energy consumption. And seen in this way, then sufficiency is something which actually makes all the efficiency gains, put them into a context, because it avoids the rebound effect. And such a sufficiency understanding then, of course, needs a lot of structural support from the Commission, from all levels of politics. To give an example from the housing sector, Mario already referred to the to the Free project. So working from a household perspective on energy efficiency, You see, we have this insulation of walls, and we have the efficient boilers. But however, what is going against and increasing the energy is the ever-increasing square meter per capita living. So this is something, a sufficiency approach, which has to be tackled as well. And just to give an example, what policy can do, besides a lot of other things, is property tax related to per capita and not to per square meter would be something to start to bring into discussion.
Yes. Hello, my name is Daniel Eichhorn. I'm working for the German Environment Agency. I'd like to build up on a consensus that was here on the panel, which is there's a big chance for a real energy transition when we consider the demand side, and that we have to tackle the demand side. And my experience from a project and several meetings with energy modelers and climate change modelers and building those who build those scenarios, they actually say they're interested in the demand side as well, but they have problems in modeling the demand side accurately because of data or lack of data. I'm not talking about simple behavioral statistics about how people behave when you just change factor X, but I'm talking about a more complex thing, and I have a modest proposal. You already said, Mr. Ferioli, that you're not from the research commission, but what would be really important would be to have a representative energy demand panel or an energy using practice panel throughout Europe to actually find out what are the behavioral or practice elasticities when you change factors and policies. We do not have that in a representative form, but so far we only have anecdotes of what changes when there's only a factor change in one city and how they change, for example, how much square meters they use. So this would be my proposal to establish such a thing, to increase data availability and to be able to actually factor in sufficiency within energy models.
Thank you. I'm Hamid Hitus. I'm just a participant. I'm just interested in the subject. I have here two remarks. I think that now we witness a big shift in our society from a society using just energy to satisfy needs, for example, to a society which is fully energy dependent. So I think it's going to be very interesting to analyze why we shifted from this model to the other one, because I think everybody now is fully dependent on his smartphone or on a laptop or other devices which use a lot of energy. So I think it's going to be interesting to invite other disciplines like history or sociology to think about what are the reasons for this shift before thinking about policies on a bigger scale. That's my question.
Alyosha Slamershak from University of Autònoma de Barcelona. I think you kind of missed your point, all of you, when you talked about intermittency, because your focus was on diurnal intermittency. That means this ability to supply renewable energy from night to day basis. But I think there is conceivable storage solutions that can happen on a day to night basis. The main problem is that we are not a tropical continent. We're not a tropical community of countries. We live in the north, so we have an intermittency problem between different seasons, meaning that, for example, in Spain, there is about 5 times less solar energy being able to extract in the winter time than it is in the summertime. So I'm really curious how you, in your scenarios where solar energy is the primary source of renewable energy in the near future, conceive these seasonal intermittency issues. How do you address that? Are you just proposing to increase the capacity, so like to supply even 5 times more than what would be needed in the summertime to provide for the shortages in the winter? So, yeah, please.
Thank you very much. So just 2 questions that I read, but I think that's already covered by other answers, but I will read it. What about the impacts of rare earths and rare metals on biodiversity? And why we are all talking about this transition can happen from a top-down perspective, history showed a struggle will be necessary against private interest. I just will ask you to answer, not to answer, but to make a final remarks, because I think that you can answer everything that we had today. That's more for food for thought that we have today. But if you want to answer something, but 2 minutes each one just for your final conclusion and remarks.
Very quickly, if you are at Barcelona, we did a study using the electric data from companies for 1 year or for 3 years, or Germany, France, and Spain, and they have the situation every 2 minutes of who is producing, who is consuming what. So it is, we have a paper submitted, and it is not day and night. It is, moreover, if you have cloudy for 1 month or 2 months, you don't have solar, and having wind is a bigger problem. It is extremely complicated because as soon as you are increasing the fraction of alternatives, you go more than 50, 60%, then become a disaster. You really start having a major, major problem. But I mean, I have a paper, if you can have it, I can give it to you. I really like the idea why we got into the linear economy in the first place. Why don't you start there? What are the pros and cons to see why we can go back or not? This is also about my conclusion of mine. Probably I've been misunderstood. I've been working for renewable and sustainable things all my life. What I'm criticizing about not is that we are trying to use alternative energy. We must do it because fossil energy is going. So there is not. What I'm saying is I am criticizing the logic that we are, okay, we have a problem with fossil energy. Okay, we take out fossil energy. With fossil energy, everything remains the same. No, it doesn't work this way. And this comes with the demand and supply. I believe that we should stop with this demand side, supply side. The system works with demand and supply together. I mean, in complex system, you have downward and upward causation, and the system works putting together the middle course graining. You cannot make, it's like the discussion before, you cannot make a discussion about how much you are supplying of alternatives, you don't have how much you are using of alternatives and when. Unless we start getting a little more sophisticated analysis in which we are looking at the same time supply and demand and what are the complications, and in a way this goes with Grégoire in the sense that it's not behavior, it's social practices. What is that the different activities of human in the different functional compartments are doing, and how they are competing with each other in using the things. And then at that point you have a continuum between what is supplied and what is consumed, because all the components of the society are consuming and giving to the other in a predicative way. So I believe that this can be done, but we should start using some model a little bit more sophisticated than just input, output, and the dynamic of Newton. We are in 2018. We could use something a little more sophisticated. This is my contribution to the discussion. I believe that the system model used at the moment, the cost-benefit analysis, are inadequate to address the complexity of the issue that they want to address. And then this implies that we do not have a good information on, we are not having an informed process of decision making. But again, this is my personal opinion. I'm not claiming that this is true. Francesco?
Okay. Regarding energy poverty, yes, we know we do. There is the European Commission set up the Energy Poverty Observatory to deal with this, and there are many different type of projects and programs that try to deal with energy poverty and saving energy. It's not exactly my field of work, but I do know that the cost of the transition will not be evenly split. Lower income people will have to bear more of the burden proportionally of it, and some region and some sector will have to bear more of the burden, and it is therefore important that we have European mechanism to redistribute, to produce, to go towards a fair transition, even though the overall impact on welfare will be positive and the cost in terms in monetary cost will not be too high. But it's not enough that this is on average. It has to work for every European. The question about being on the same side of the bad guy. Yes, thank you very much. Perfect is the enemy of good. So we need to start, as it was said, we need to start from what we know it works today, and our experience with renewable is broader than just the energy Wende or the cost of the energy Wende in Germany. And it is global a success story given the amount of investments that are happening all over the world, and also the global emission trajectory that, at least for that little bit, it stabilized for a couple of years before starting increasing again. But this is what we have to work with. Which this doesn't mean that we should discount other issue, other social issue, like of different taxation to bring forward a different model. I just want to convey how difficult that is to put in practice. We had people complaining about the banning of light bulbs, which is shocking because it's a complete waste of money, something which pays back itself within less than 1 year, and we have people complaining about that. So how do we bring forward some more ambitious changing in taxation at the European level? This will definitely not be the work for the Commission, but you can ask members of the European Parliament how is it possible to do that. But we need to, this is what I think we need to prepare for. We need to prepare in the future, and we need to study indeed why people want to use more energy, what is their relation with consumption. But our problems, we don't have the luxury of time. We need to start immediately with what we can do today, with standards on appliances that will be far away from the global solution, but it's something that we can do today. And regarding the scale, the intermittent renewable, yes, we know the problem is that week in the winter where you have no sun and no wind. That is the problem for renewable, and we try to account for that. Is not that you need 5 times more. If you look at the data over a week on a large region such as Germany, you can have a 75% decline in the output of renewable, excluding what is biomass. So in theory, you only need 75% of reserve margin of gas that will not emit a lot because you only use it for 1 week. So that, but we can do a lot better than that. We can do a lot better than that with interconnection because it will not be that calm all over Europe. We can do with seasonal storage. We can do it with pump hydro, which we can store in the Alps a certain amount. This all will help reducing. And then you will, if you still have some budget left for some emission, you can use gas plants. And if you don't have it, you can do something else, which doesn't mean that is easy, which doesn't mean that it's possible to go tomorrow to minus 100%. It means that when we will be there, we'll already be minus 50, we'll already be minus 60, and we will, instead of waiting for some other measure to happen. And this is...
Okay, quite quickly, because I don't want to waste your time. Yeah, as I said earlier, the problem with renewable is that we want to adapt the energy to our activities. And really, I think we have to create new narratives around available energy. And I think the remark about how ICT tools have invaded our lives is quite very interesting. We need this kind of narratives, how technology have changed our life, and how, and that not always for the better, but at least to understand the coevolution of infrastructures, technology, and practices in order to be able to suggest other pathways where we can reduce the amount of materials and energy that we use in our daily practices.
That was fast.
Yes.
Thank you very much to everybody. Thank you very much to you to be present. There was a lot of questions, a lot of debate, and so I think we can say that we have still debate here between the European Commission, between the European Parliament, and between the academics and you from the social movement, trade unions, and academics. Just have these few points about the new model, which model we should use to make the prediction based on complexity or based on Newton, something that you said. We have this debate on behavior change or social practices. I think that was a point that was made. I think that we have to think about that, about sufficiency and efficiency. That was very interesting to see this different point of view that we can have, about the complexity between demand and supply. Maybe that's not so easy to distinguish which is what. And about energy and democracy. So you know that you have a lot of work to do at home, because energy and democracy, that's a big one that we have. And I think that there is a relationship. I think there is a relationship between energy and democracy, and I think we have to tackle this issue. And I think that's the last point that you made is very interesting about the narrative. Let's adapt to the reality and not on the contrary. So maybe that's a point that we can build on. And if you want to work more on technology, because technology was something transversal, mainstream that we have today, tomorrow we will have another workshop based on technology. We have two people from more the post-growth movement and two people from the European Commission. I will moderate this debate, so I will look forward to see you tomorrow in this debate, because we will go deeper on this issue of technology, growth and energy. Thank you very much to all of you. Grazie mille. Merci beaucoup, and see you next time.